David was a child full of promise. Born into a simple home in Lopa village, he was the pride of his parents, Justine and Amara. Justine and Amara were small traders, known for being honest and cheerful. Their shop was on a busy corner where they sold yams, gari, and spices to their neighbors. They were not rich, but they had enough to live on and were happy with their lives. Even though their life was simple, David's parents taught him to work hard and be honest. "My son, it's not about what you have," Justine would say, "but who you are and how you live." David listened to these words carefully as he sat in the shop, watching his parents work and help others. In the evenings, the family would sit together, share stories, and laugh over a bowl of soup under the soft light of a kerosene lamp. However, deep down, Justine wanted more. He sometimes looked at other men with big shops and fancy cars and wished he could give his family a better life. These thoughts stayed hidden until one evening, when something happened that changed everything. It was a warm evening, and Justine was tired after a long day. He decided to stop at a local beer parlor to relax before heading home. The place was noisy with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Justine sat in a quiet corner, sipping his drink and thinking about Amara and David at home. "Justine? Is that you?" A voice called. Justine looked up and saw a tall man in fine clothes and a shiny gold watch. It took him a moment, but then he recognized the man as Nduka, an old friend from his younger days. "Nduka," Justine said with surprise. "It's been so long." The two men hugged and sat down to talk. Nduka spoke about his life, boasting of his wealth, his lands, and his connections with powerful people. He seemed so successful, and Justine couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and envy. "My brother, life can change if you are ready to take risks," Nduka said. He pulled out a small card from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Come to this address if you want to talk more. I can show you the way." Justine stared at the card as if it held a secret. He thanked Nduka and walked home, his mind filled with questions. That night, he told Amara about the meeting. "Amara, do you think it's possible for me to make it big?" he asked. Amara frowned. "What are you thinking, Justine? What did he say to you?" Justine hesitated, then showed her the card. "He says he can help me. But what if it's dangerous? You hear stories these days about rituals and betrayals." Amara looked worried. "Justine, whatever we have now is enough. Don't let greed take over. Think of David. Think of us." But the thought of more kept growing in Justine's mind. A few days later, he made his decision. One morning, Justine kissed Amara goodbye and promised to be back by evening. He put on his best clothes, tucked the card into his pocket, and set off to meet Nduka. Amara watched him go with a heavy heart, a feeling of unease creeping over her. When Justine didn't return home that night, Amara's unease turned into dread. She tried to stay calm, convincing herself that he was delayed, but as the hours dragged on, hope began to fade. The next morning, she went to the address on the card, only to find an empty lot. The mansion Justine had described to her earlier was gone, as if it had never existed. Desperation drove her to the police, but they dismissed her concerns. "Men leave all the time," one officer said bluntly. "Maybe he found a better life in the city." Amara refused to believe that Justine had abandoned them. She clung to hope, searching tirelessly for months, but every lead led to a dead end. The village began to whisper, and neighbors avoided her shop. "He must have gone to the ritualists," they murmured. "These days, no one can be trusted." For David, his father's disappearance was a wound that never healed. He watched his mother grow weary and frail, her once bright eyes dulled by sorrow. The weight of responsibility fell on his young shoulders, hardening him. Unknown to his family, Justine arrived at the address Nduka had given him. The house was far from the bustling center of town, tucked in a quiet, eerie neighborhood surrounded by tall, gnarled trees. It was a grand but unsettling mansion, with gates adorned in intricate carvings of symbols Justine didn't recognize. The air felt heavier as he approached, his chest tightening with every step. A tall man dressed in a dark suit opened the gate before Justine could knock. "You are expected," the man said curtly, his voice cold and hollow. Justine hesitated but followed the man through the courtyard. The inside of the house was lavish. Golden chandeliers, velvet curtains, and expensive furniture filled the rooms. Yet, beneath the opulence was an unshakable sense of foreboding. In the dining room sat Nduka, dressed even more extravagantly than before. A large feast was laid out before him, though he appeared uninterested in the food. "Justine, my old friend," Nduka said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came. That means you're ready to take control of your destiny." "I came to learn," Justine stammered. "To see if this is real." Nduka's laughter echoed through the room. "Oh, it's very real. Wealth beyond imagination is within your grasp, but it comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Before Justine could respond, 2 other men entered the room, their expressions as cold as the man at the gate. They placed a small box on the table and opened it to reveal an array of strange objects: a vial of red liquid, a carved bone, and a small figurine that seemed to writhe as if alive. "This is the ritual," Nduka said. "Your first step to true power. All you have to do is trust me." Justine's mind raced. He thought of Amara and David waiting for him at home, their lives of modest happiness. He remembered Amara's warning about greed and the stories of those who had disappeared chasing wealth. But he also remembered the struggles, the yearning to provide a better life for his family. "What's the price?" Justine asked, his voice trembling. Nduka's smile widened. "Sacrifice. It doesn't have to be much, just something meaningful. A piece of yourself, so to speak. After that, the doors to wealth and power will open for you." The room felt suffocating. Justine looked at the objects on the table, then at Nduka. "Why are you doing this for me?" he asked. "You were always a friend," Nduka replied smoothly. "And besides, the wealth we share only grows when others join us. Think of it as a partnership." Justine's instincts screamed at him to leave, but the lure of what Nduka offered was too strong. He reached for the vial of red liquid, his hand trembling. What Justine didn't know was that Nduka's wealth was fading. His fortune, built on dark rituals, required constant renewal. The price he paid every few years grew steeper, and now it was time for another offering. Justine was his chosen sacrifice. The ritual demanded not only material wealth but the life force of a willing participant. Nduka's charm and persuasion had ensured that Justine walked willingly into his doom. As Justine drank from the vial, his vision blurred, and a coldness spread through his body. Nduka chanted ancient words, and the room spun. Justine's last thoughts were of Amara and David, his regret consuming him as darkness claimed him. Nduka watched as the ritual completed, his own vitality restored. He felt no guilt. Justine had made his choice. For Nduka, survival and power were all that mattered. But even as he reveled in his renewed wealth, a shadow loomed over him. The cost of his actions was growing, and one day, he would face the consequences. Days turned into weeks, and the once vibrant shop Amara and Justine ran together became a ghost of its former self. Customers dwindled, driven away by the whispers and suspicious glances that followed Amara wherever she went. "She's cursed," the neighbors muttered. "Her husband must have been taken by the gods for meddling in things too dark to speak of." Amara was too proud to beg, but her desperation became evident. David, now barely a teenager, began skipping school to help her sell what little they had. He worked tirelessly, carrying sacks of yams under the hot sun and enduring the jeers of classmates who mocked his father's disappearance. "Where's your father now, David?" they would sneer. "Did he trade himself for gold?" Each taunt hardened David further. His resentment festered, transforming him into a boy with one goal: to prove them all wrong. At night, while Amara wept quietly in her room, David stared at the stars and made silent vows. "One day, I'll show them. I'll be rich, and no one will ever look down on us again." On the other hand, Nduka's wealth flourished after Justine's sacrifice. New businesses sprouted under his name, his cars multiplied, and his influence in society grew. Yet, in the quiet hours of the night, he felt the weight of his choices. The rituals demanded not only the lives of others but pieces of Nduka himself. Each renewal left him colder, more detached from the world. He could no longer feel the simple joys he once enjoyed. The laughter of children, the warmth of the sun, even the taste of the finest wine, all were dull to him now. Still, he justified it to himself. "Better them than me," he often muttered. "Survival is all that matters." But the spirits were not so easily appeased. They began to visit Nduka in his dreams, whispering ominous warnings. "Your debt grows," they hissed. "One day, no sacrifice will suffice." Years passed, and David grew into a determined young man. The cheerful boy who once laughed under the glow of a kerosene lamp was gone. In his place stood someone hardened by loss and fueled by ambition. Amara worked tirelessly to keep the shop running, but her health began to fail, and the weight of their struggles fell squarely on David's shoulders. "You must focus on your studies, my son," Amara would say, even when she coughed weakly. "It's your education that will save us." But David had other plans. School felt like a waste of time to him. He saw his peers, those who had dropped out, returning to the village with motorcycles, flashy clothes, and money to spare. They spoke of opportunities in the city, places where wealth could be made quickly if one was clever enough. David envied them. Amara's health began to deteriorate. The stress of running the shop, coupled with her heartbreak, wore her down. One evening, as she lay coughing on her straw mat, she called David to her side. "My son," she began, her voice frail but firm, "I have taught you to be honest, to work hard, and to trust in the goodness of life. Promise me you will never stray from that path." David clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Mama, honesty doesn't bring wealth. Look at us. Look at what being good has done to our family." Amara reached out, placing a weak hand on his cheek. "We may not have riches, but we have something greater: integrity. Don't let anger blind you, David. Don't let it destroy you." David nodded, but his heart was already set. As Amara drifted off to sleep, he whispered under his breath, "I'll make us rich, Mama. No matter the cost." One evening, while locking up the shop, he ran into Chigozie, an old friend who had recently come back to the village. Chigozie's expensive watch and confident smile told a story of success. "David, my brother, you're still here in this dusty village?" Chigozie teased. "Come to the city. There's work for men like us." "What kind of work?" David asked, his curiosity piqued. Chigozie smiled slyly. "Let's just say it pays well. You'll have everything you've ever dreamed of. But it's not for the faint-hearted." David hesitated, but the thought of escaping the village's poverty was tempting. He agreed to meet Chigozie the next day to discuss further. That night, as he lay on his mat, he thought of his father and the path that had led to his disappearance. "I'm not like him," David told himself. "Good men get nothing in this world," he told himself. "If I want to succeed, I'll have to do it my way. I'll be smarter. I'll make it and come back for my mama." But deep down, a quiet fear gnawed at him, warning that the path he was about to take might cost him more than he imagined. David's ambition consumed him. He left for the city, determined to chase the kind of wealth he believed his father had sought. David's first weeks in the city were overwhelming. The chaotic streets of Lagos were a stark contrast to the quiet village of Obioha. At first, he felt small and insignificant among the towering buildings and relentless noise. But he quickly realized that the city rewarded those who could adapt. "I'll carve my name into this city," he thought, staring at the bright neon lights of the marketplace one night. His friend Chigozie introduced him to the underworld of illicit dealings. It began with petty errands, delivering envelopes to shadowy figures, carrying briefcases filled with money, and chauffeuring men in expensive suits to secret meetings. The money was good, but it came with a cost, a constant feeling of being watched, of knowing one wrong step could end his life. David rationalized it all. "This is temporary. Once I've made enough, I'll leave this life behind and start something clean." But the deeper he went, the harder it became to climb out. Months into his new life, David faced his first moral crossroads. Chigozie asked him to participate in a deal that required more than errands. It required loyalty and secrecy. "The boss needs us to handle someone," Chigozie explained. "Handle?" David asked, his chest tightening. Chigozie's face darkened. "It's either him or us. This is how the game works, David. You said you wanted to be rich, right?" That night, as David and Chigozie cornered their target in an alley, David's hands trembled. He told himself it was for survival, for his mother, for the life he dreamed of. But when the man fell, bleeding and pleading for his life, a part of David broke. He has fallen in with dangerous men, much like Nduka had, and climbed the ranks of a shadowy network. But the cycle of greed and sacrifice repeated itself. David, too, was drawn into the dark rituals that promised quick riches but demanded unspeakable prices. His decisions mirrored those of his father, and though he achieved fleeting wealth, it came at the cost of his humanity. "Is this what it takes?" he whispered to himself later, staring at his bloodied hands. "Is this the price of success?" He buried the guilt deep, convincing himself it was justified. Yet the man's face haunted his dreams, and his smile grew colder with each passing day. As time passed, David climbed the ranks within Obiora's syndicate. He became known for his quick thinking and ruthless determination. The money flowed in, and for the first time, he felt a sense of control over his life. He sent large sums back to his mother, who never questioned where it came from but grew increasingly worried about the changes in her son's voice. "David, are you safe?" Amara asked during one of their rare phone calls. "Of course, Mama," he lied. "I'm building a future for us. Trust me." But even as he assured her, David felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The money, the clothes, the cars, all of it felt hollow. The more he gained, the more he realized it was never enough. David's breaking point came when Obiora summoned him for a private meeting. "You've proven yourself, David," Obiora said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "But to go further, you must make a sacrifice." David's stomach churned. He knew what sacrifice meant in this world. It wasn't about giving up money or possessions, it was about blood. "You mean?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Obiora nodded. "Your loyalty must be sealed. Bring me someone close to you. A friend. A relative. Someone whose loss will mark your commitment to our cause." David left the meeting in a daze, the weight of the demand suffocating him. 4 days, he wrestled with the decision. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting thoughts. As David stood on the precipice of his final act, a betrayal that would solidify his power, he caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror. For a moment, he saw his father's face staring back at him, not with anger but with sorrow. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. He had become the very thing he despised. "If I don't do it, they'll kill me," he reasoned. "But if I do, How will I live with myself? He thought of his mother, of her frail hands and tired eyes. He thought of Chigozie, the only person who had been with him through thick and thin. And then he thought of himself, of the life he had fought so hard to build. In the end, David made his choice. On a quiet evening, David invited Chigozie to dinner. They laughed and reminisced about their village days, sharing a bottle of expensive wine, but he had laced Chigozie's glass cup. David smiled, but inside he was dying. When the moment came, he couldn't look Chigozie in the eye. He muttered an apology under his breath, barely audible over the noise of his pounding heart. "David, what are you doing?" Chigozie asked, confusion turning to fear as two masked men entered the room. "It's not personal," David whispered. "It's survival." Chigozie's screams echoed in David's ears long after the deed was done. He returned to Obiora with a hollow victory, his face pale and his hands trembling. "You've done well," Obiora said, patting him on the back. "Welcome to the inner circle." But the weight of the sacrifice was unbearable. David's nights were filled with nightmares of Chigozie's face, his accusations, his betrayal. Each step forward in his new life felt like a step deeper into darkness. In the months that followed, David became a shadow of himself. He had everything he thought he wanted: wealth, power, respect, but he felt more lost than ever. He began to question his journey. Is this what my father wanted? Did he walk this same path? And if so, where did it lead him? The riches he had gained felt like chains, binding him to a life he no longer wanted. He tried to find solace in the things money could buy, but nothing brought him peace. One evening, as he sat alone in his luxurious apartment, staring at a photo of his younger self with his mother and father, David broke down. "I've become the very thing I hated," he whispered through tears. "But it's too late to turn back now." David sat in the dimly lit living room of his penthouse, surrounded by opulence that now felt suffocating. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. On the glass coffee table sat a photo of Chigozie and him from their village days, smiling with youthful innocence. He couldn't look at it without feeling a knot in his chest. Chigozie's face haunted him in every reflective surface: mirrors, windows, even the sheen of his polished shoes. "Is this what I wanted?" he muttered, his voice trembling. "Was it worth it?" The weight of his choices bore down on him like an invisible hand gripping his throat. He had sacrificed a friend, betrayed his morals, and climbed to the top of a ladder built on lies and blood. Yet, the summit felt emptier than the poverty he had once despised. David found himself drinking heavily to drown the voices in his head, but they only grew louder. One night, David woke in a cold sweat. The room was dark, but he felt a presence. At the foot of his bed stood Chigozie, his face pale and his eyes filled with sorrow. "You betrayed me, David," the ghost said, his voice echoing in the room. "For what? Money? Power? Was it worth my life?" David scrambled out of bed, trembling. "You're not real. You're not real," he shouted, but the apparition didn't fade. "Your choices have chained you to this life," Chigozie's ghost continued. "You wanted riches, but you've gained nothing but a prison of your own making." The ghost vanished, leaving David gasping for air. He tried to dismiss it as a figment of his guilt-ridden imagination, but the encounter left him shaken. For days, he avoided mirrors and dark corners, fearing what he might see. As David's mental state deteriorated, cracks began to form in the empire he had built with Obiora. His decisions grew erratic, his temper short. He lashed out at subordinates for minor mistakes and began doubting the loyalty of everyone around him. Obiora noticed the change. "David, you're losing focus," he said during a meeting. "If you can't control yourself, someone else will take your place." David's paranoia deepened. He suspected Obiora was plotting against him, just as he had plotted against others to climb the ranks. He began carrying a gun at all times, sleeping with one eye open, and avoiding public places. Despite his growing wealth, he felt more vulnerable than ever. The riches that once symbolized success now felt like a target on his back. Meanwhile, back in the village, Amara had grown increasingly concerned about her son. The money he sent was plentiful, but it came without warmth or explanation. She rarely heard from him, and when she did, his voice was cold and distant. One day, she gathered the courage to call him. "David, my son, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. "I'm fine, Mama," he replied curtly. "But you don't sound fine," she pressed. "Whatever you're doing, my son, please remember who you are. Don't lose yourself." David clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Mama, you don't understand. I'm doing this for us." "For us," she repeated, her voice breaking. "I'd rather have nothing and see you happy than have all the money in the world and lose my son to it." The call ended abruptly, leaving both of them in tears. For Amara, the silence that followed felt heavier than ever. For David, it was a reminder of how far he had strayed from the values his parents had instilled in him. David's paranoia reached its peak when he learned that one of his associates had been arrested and was cooperating with the police. He knew it was only a matter of time before they came for him. He decided to flee the country, using his wealth to secure a new identity and passage out of Nigeria. But as he packed his bags, the weight of his choices pressed harder than ever. The faces of those he had betrayed, Chigozie, his father, even himself, flashed before his eyes. He realized that no matter where he went, he couldn't escape the man he had become. As he boarded a private plane bound for a foreign land, David felt no relief, only a deep, gnawing emptiness. Nduka's wealth began to crumble not long after David traveled. His businesses faced unexpected losses, his allies turned against him, and his health waned. The spirits he had bargained with now demanded more frequent sacrifices, each one leaving him weaker than before. Desperate, Nduka sought another candidate to renew his fortune. But this time, the spirits refused. "We have taken too much from others," they growled. "Now, you must pay with your own blood." Nduka tried to bargain, offering more wealth, more power, but the spirits were unyielding. "Your time is up, Nduka," they declared. "Your soul belongs to us." The once powerful man was left to rot in his empty mansion, haunted by the faces of those he had sacrificed. Among them was Justine, whose eyes burned with quiet vengeance. In his new life abroad, David lived in luxury, sought medical help, but no one repaired his soul, and the isolation was unbearable. He had no friends, no family, no purpose beyond spending the money he had sacrificed so much to obtain. Each night, he dreamed of his village, of the laughter he had shared with Chigozie, of the simple life he had abandoned. The wealth that had once seemed so important now felt meaningless. One evening, as he sat on the balcony of his mansion overlooking the city, he whispered to himself, "What have I done? Was this all for nothing?" The realization hit him like a tidal wave. The choices he had made had not only destroyed others but had also robbed him of his soul. Years passed, and David grew older, lonelier, and more regretful. One day, he received a letter from a distant relative in the village, informing him of his mother's death. Amara had passed away, her heart broken by the loss of her husband and the distance of her son. The news shattered David. He realized he had no one left to share his wealth with, no one who truly cared for him. In a final act of desperation, David returned to Nigeria, seeking redemption. But the ghosts of his past were waiting for him. The village whispered of his return, and enemies from his criminal days resurfaced. One fateful night, as he walked through the streets of his old village, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. A single gunshot echoed through the night, and David fell to the ground. As he lay there, bleeding and staring at the night sky, His life flashed before his eyes. He thought of his father, his mother, Chigozie, and the boy he used to be. "I lost my way," he whispered with his final breath, as the darkness consumed him. David's story became a cautionary tale in Obioha village, a reminder of the cost of unchecked ambition and the emptiness of wealth gained through betrayal and bloodshed. His name was spoken with a mix of pity and warning, a symbol of how greed could destroy not only lives but souls. And so, the boy who once dreamed of greatness became a shadow in the annals of the village's history, a lesson for generations to come. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more captivating tales, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.